Not a shot was fired, and there was no blood. But the battle for supremacy in semiconductor manufacturing in East Asia has always been brutal. We take a look at the clash of the region's semiconductor titans.
From Taiwan to Kumamoto Prefecture in Japan, the South Korean city of Pyeongtaek, and the U.S. state of Arizona.
Advanced semiconductor manufacturing to make a comeback here in America after 40 years.
A global rush to build new semiconductor manufacturing capacity is underway. They also form what's known as the Chip 4 Alliance, seen as an attempt to encircle China's chip ambitions. But even within the US-led small yard and high fence, the battle is fierce. Japan once reigned supreme in global semiconductor manufacturing. In the 1980s, ultra-efficient Japanese memory producers controlled up to 70% of the global DRAM market at one point, pushing their American competitors to the brink of collapse. But the absolute dominance soon bred hubris and overinvestment. In the 1990s, when memory prices crashed amid an economic downturn, Japanese DRAM producers crumbled. When Japanese memory maker Elpida filed for bankruptcy in 2012, the country officially bowed out of the industry it once dominated. In the decades since, while Japan still controls key materials in semiconductor manufacturing, such as photoresist, photomasks, and silicon wafers, it never gained back its former glory. By 2022, it produced less than 10% of the world's semiconductors. Now it's seizing on the global realignment of semiconductor manufacturing capacity as its last chance to make a comeback. The failure of Japanese memory makers in the 1990s left an opening for newcomers in the region. In 1992, South Korea's Samsung became the largest producer of memory chips in the world, and it never looked back. Around that time in Taiwan,
I think that the semiconductor market will grow 200 to 300 basis points more than the world GDP.
Maurice Chang, the island's legendary semiconductor godfather, took TSMC public first in Taiwan and later on the New York Stock Exchange, setting the company firmly on its path to be a dominant, pure-play foundry of the world's most advanced chips. As of today, these are chips that are 8 nanometers or smaller and widely used in smartphones, supercomputers, and data centers. Samsung entered the foundry business only in 2017. Compared to TSMC's nearly 60% global market share, Samsung's share of slightly more than 10% would make it seem like a distant second. But the South Korean tech giant anticipates the race to get tighter when the industry enters the lane of 2-nanometer process by 2025, where it said it aims to dislodge TSMC. The global semiconductor industry flourished in the last few decades, partly thanks to the rise of China as a key customer. For a while, China's semiconductor industry followed a tried and tested path of exchanging market for technology and enjoyed rapid growth. It became a force to be reckoned with, especially in legacy chips, semiconductors that are produced with 28-nanometer technology or larger. That all changed when the US pressed the pause button on China's advancement in what it called choke points of foundational technologies. It cut off China's access to critical materials and equipment needed to make cutting-edge chips, among other things. President Xi Jinping has for a decade called for breakthroughs be made to untangle China from what it called 掐脖子 or stranglehold technologies, a total of 35 of them, 7 of which are related to semiconductors, according to state media.
400年
In a widely circulated video on Chinese social media platforms, a Peking University professor was seen telling his students that based on their study, it will take 400 years to get China to where it is today if it were to fully research, develop and build the high-speed train system on its own. Without unfettered access to the global supply chains for semiconductors, can China's chip ambitions come true?
And for more, let's speak with Professor Seijiro Takashita from the University of Shizuoka and our senior correspondent Michio Ishida in Japan. Well, let's just start with you first, Professor. Given the global rush to build a new semiconductor manufacturing capacity, what are some of the factors that are driving the surge in investment and also its impact on the industry's landscape?
Well, firstly, it's continuous pent-up demand from the coronavirus, but particularly because of AI, and also obviously various other products, including household appliances as well as electronic goods that's related, and also chemical sector, which is related to the components of the semiconductors, are also likely to do well. So we are going to see a very big continuous influx of demand. But I think what's most important is, as you just reported, I think the whole scene is going to change and is changing as we speak, as the U.S. tries to create what's called the Chip 4, which is consolidation of the free world against China in the distribution of the semiconductor, particularly in the forefront technology side.
All right. Michio, let's bring you in here. Now, reflecting on Japan's historical dominance in semiconductor manufacturing and unfortunately its subsequent decline, what lessons did they learn? And I guess how are they trying to get better at it again?
Well, as we heard earlier, Japan used to be the semiconductor powerhouse. That was in the late 1980s with 50% of market share. The industry then went downhill after facing pressure from the United States. Then the emergence of Samsung and other powerhouses. And today, Japan's market share is around 9%. And no Japanese firms make the world's top 10 list. Before, in the late 1980s, it was basically Japanese companies such as NEC, Fujitsu, Toshiba. But in terms of semicon-related materials today, Japan has 30% market share. Some Japanese companies have the biggest share in the world in terms of its devices. That's their strength today. And for that, they seem to be attracting semiconductor foundries to Japan. One, perhaps TSMC, as you know, has decided to build 2 new factories in Kumamoto Prefecture and Kyushu. US Micron Technology plans to produce DRAM in Hiroshima from as early as late 2025. And Samsung will open a new R&D center in Yokohama. And perhaps the best lesson Japan is learning is that rather than just cooperating with Japanese companies or looking inward, as it has back in the 1980s, it's looking into international cooperation regarding its technology.
Okay. Now, Michio, I just want to bring Professor in here because earlier you talked about, there is this influx of demand, the scene is going to change. How then is it going to impact I'm wondering what the economic impacts, rather, of these developments, job creation, technological innovation, trade dynamics, that sort of thing?
I think what, most of the players have learned is that because of this quick transition that we've been seeing, it's better to complement each other than competing unnecessarily. What you can see is, for example, the chip manufacturers. You look at Samsung, you look at Hynix, but they can't do anything without, the help of the Japanese semiconductor-related materials, like hydrogen fluoride or high-performance resist, what have you, as you just reported earlier. So what we're seeing is much more of a complementing kind of relationship that is being created. And this is what the Chip 4 creation is targeting, basically to hold a scrum of the Japanese, of the Koreans, Taiwanese, the Dutch, and the Americans, basically creating a supply chain which is much more stable and at the same time is not affected by the political motives of China. So basically, this whole issue right now will be and is very much related to the war of hegemony between the United States and China. And semiconductor industry in East Asia is a very crucial part of this because, as you reported earlier, this is the top-notch front technology which relates to all industries, including military side. So obviously, this is where Mr. Biden is trying to squeeze China out as far as this war of hegemony is concerned. So I think we have to look at this in a much bigger picture than just severe competition in the region.
A good point you've made there. Well, China, they're trying to push its advanced manufacturing sector, but it is coming up against a skills mismatch. And this was told to us by a recruitment specialist that we spoke to earlier. Let's take a listen.
Particularly in markets like China, it wants to see that advancement to basically provide greater efficiency and productivity, not only just from its own labor force production, but also to be seen as the hub and spoke within the Asian markets for global companies who want to invest in the manufacturing capability, and for it to remain competitive, say, against markets like Malaysia. But where you see difficulty is the labor supply market is not matching in its skill sets to advance themselves in this digitization and automation.
That was Randstad Asia Pacific Managing Director Jaya Das. Michio, so we've been hearing about Rapidus, if that's how it's pronounced in the news lately. Who exactly are they, and why is Japan pinning its hopes on it to bring back its semiconductor industry?
Well, Rapidus was formed with 8 big companies such as Toyota, Sony, NTT, SoftBank, Denso, Mitsubishi, UFJ Bank, with IBM as its partner. And in Washington last week, Prime Minister Fumio Kishida highlighted this partnership. Its factory is being constructed in Hokkaido's Chitose to start operation next April. And in terms of full production, it's expected in April 2027. And it's aimed to produce 2 nanometer semiconductors, which no one has succeeded yet. And at this point, Japan produces only 40 nanometer semiconductors, which analysts here call Japan 10 years behind. Samsung and TSMC, for instance, develop 3 nanometer at this point and wants to develop 2 nanometers by 2025. Well, why is Japan bringing back semiconductor? Well, Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry says that during COVID-19, cars could not be produced in Japan due to the lack of semiconductors. And Japan, as you know, is one of the biggest car makers. So that's when the government realized the importance of producing semiconductors domestically, and its own semiconductor industry is vital to its economic security.